Aloha kākou apau. This is Kai Opua Fife with the Kiwane Foundation, again bringing you another segment of Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's future. We're here at the Palace. We have a little different angle than what we normally do, and I think I understand that what's in the background may be significant to the topic that we're going to discuss with Henry Curtis. Henry, thank you very much for being with us today.
Aloha, Kai Opua.
Appreciate it very much. I've seen we've kind of collaborated by email, but I hadn't really, met you in person and gotten to spend some time with you until just recently. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? It sounds to me as though you don't come from Hawaii, so you must come from somewhere else. And where would that be? And how did you get here from that place?
Well, I was born in New York City. My earliest recollection was in walking on trails in Connecticut, being outside, walking across streams, and that kind of stuff. And I've always been drawn to nature. And I came to Hawaii in 1991, so it was many years after my birth.
Yeah, I think when a lot of people hear New York, the first thing you think about is skyscrapers and subways and all the things that go with
well, I did drive
city.
a cab nights in New York City while I was in school, so I'm familiar with the city.
There you go. But a lot of people don't realize just how much natural environment there is up there in New York State. Going all the way up, there's just beautiful, beautiful country, beautiful natural environment up there. And so you came to Hawaii in 1991?
I came with an environmental group that wanted to bring work on national issues in Hawaii. And it turns out they're no longer here, but I am.
Okay. So good for you, and good luck to them wherever they went back to, huh? Do the issues that you originally came here to address in that project, are you still working at that direction, or have you kind of changed
I've swerved and come fully back because the passion that I had was on sustainable agriculture, on pesticides, on groundwater contamination, and working years in California on that issue. And then I came here and got sidestepped to military cleanup and energy policy.
Right.
But now energy policy is winding back to biofuels, which is, can agriculture be sustainable? So it is a complete circle.
Yeah, so you've come back around to where you began, and you'll probably keep circling.
Yes, yes.
Or not so much a circle, but kind of a spiral maybe.
Yes, a spiral.
So sustainable ag and hazardous materials and pesticides, and what is it that you're locked into right now that just makes you want to get up every morning and get out that door and get to doing whatever you're doing?
Well, when we won the Wahila Ridge transmission line fight after a 6-year battle before the land board for a proposed transmission line, I always felt at that time that energy would wind up at that building right there, which is the Public Utilities Commission, which is one of the most secretive state agencies you'll ever meet. They don't decide, they don't make votes in public. They have a problem with sunshine. They have a problem with opening up the process. And the legislature has largely looked the other way in all these involving the public. So that we're the only group that intervenes in regulatory dockets. And I'll give you an example with Kauai. When Kauai was going to be sold to the co-op, they had a lawyer who represented the buyer and a lawyer who represented the seller, and he was the same person. And they had a file this thick, and then the window to intervene was over, and they expanded it to this thick. And one of the things they had in it was, if it turns out that Port Allen is a Superfund site, if there's massive contamination there, done under citizens' reign, then normally citizens would be responsible for cleaning it up. But the co-op bought it with the following conditions. 1, they would open no doors without permission. 2, they would look under no rocks at all. And 3, if anything was discovered, they would assume the full liability, and they could not tell their own ratepayers about it without written prior permission from the seller. And so we then applied to get back into the docket, and the Public Utilities Commission said, sorry, the window to intervene was over, you're out of luck. And it's really the people of Kauai who are out of luck, because if there's some contamination there, you're stuck with it thanks to the Public Utilities Commission.
Now, you mentioned Kauai. Okay, Kauai is a separate island, but are they subject to the decisions that come out of this building over here?
This building handles all water companies, all sewage companies except municipal, all phone companies, all oil, all utilities. So yeah, they cover, and all vehicles that pick up people in one location and drop them off in another, or fit more than like a bigger size, like buses and stuff.
Yeah.
So they regulate all kinds of things. And they're also regulating the gas companies to see if there's prices are too high and that kind of stuff.
Kiwane Foundation is based on Kauai, and I live there as often as I can be at home. And so I know a little something about the co-op, Kauai Island Utility Cooperative, or co-op, yeah. And I was somewhat aware of what was going on at the time when this was taking place, and it seemed to me that they were assuming a lot. I guess maybe they had no choice, but in purchasing the utility, they had they assumed all of the liability for what existed previously, and I don't know if that's normal.
No, like Love Canal,
Yeah.
it was purchased for a ridiculously small amount of money. The contamination was discovered there decades after the purchase price,
Right.
but the contaminator was responsible
That
for
makes
it.
sense to me. Yeah, that makes sense to me.
And like the Hudson River in New York has PCB at the bottom of it. And it's a question of whether the company that put it all there should pay the billions of dollars to clean it up, or pretend that the best solution is to do nothing
Yeah.
and get them off the hook.
Of course, a lot of times when you get enough time between them, and sometimes your exit strategy is such that there are no resources, there are no assets that anybody can get anyway after they do these kind of things. So it's kind of disheartening. You use the word sunshine, and I know you used it in a context relating to openness and so forth. And when I heard sunshine, I thought solar energy. That's what came to my mind.
Yes. Sunshine, solar energy is very good. When I talk about sunshine, I mean you're allowed 20 days from the time the docket is open, the regulatory proceeding, to intervene.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can look for 6 months and not find any document that is actually opened.
Yeah.
You go to the PUC, they have a file of new dockets. It may be months out of date. The Department of Commerce and Consumer Affairs, they've had files that are 6 months out of date last summer. So it's like, how do you intervene?
Pretty discouraging if you not only can't find out, you can't have a seat at the table,
And you don't know the table's there.
and you don't know where the table is sometimes, or when the meetings are. I mean, this unfortunately seems to happen quite a bit in Hawaii and other places. But
Yes.
today you're concentrating on what? What is the most recent hot topic for you?
We have
As narrowly as possible, so that we could have our viewers kind of focus in on what it is that you're doing today that's really your priority.
the priority is that climate change is real, that it threatens to overwhelm society, that we must make changes from the fuels that we're using to cleaner fuels. And the top priority is that the cleaner fuel that we pick has to really be cleaner. For example, there's a lot of approach to use Indonesian and Malaysian palm oil. Turns out if you look at the life cycle from the time you first get the crop in the ground to the time you use it, the total use over its lifetime is worse than oil or coal. So if we were oil in this state and we know that coal is bad, why would we go to palm oil, which is worse?
Yeah. You know, when was it? A couple of months ago, there was some discussions about palm oil, the solution. You know, tropical. We can do that here. And I didn't hear a lot on the other side, on the downside. So what do you think is a viable solution from your perspective for Hawaii? The answer to a sustainable energy. And I asked this in a context from when I first returned home about 20 years ago. Some of the work I was doing was related to or following up on a cogeneration facility that existed here. And so that's kind of sustainable. I guess the downfall was that the city and county of Honolulu really didn't know how to manage what they had there, and it wound up dollar-wise being actually a loser.
Right.
Because of the way the contract was written by the engineering developer that went in.
The traditional engine, whether it's in a car or a power plant, converts anywhere from 10 to 30% of the energy into electricity or power, and the rest is lost as heat.
Yeah.
Cogeneration can take it anywhere from 40 to 90%, so it's a lot better. But we're also looking at things like photovoltaic, we're looking at wind, we're looking at wave power, we're looking at ocean thermal energy conversion, because Hawaii has way too much renewables. We could power all of our state hundreds of times over just with renewables. So it's not a question of a shortage. We have a huge supply. But last year we bought 50 million gallons of oil at almost $100 a barrel. That's $5 billion. That's $4,000 per person here, including little kids. The average kid is spending $4,000 buying oil to come in here to create global warming and to lose our money, which makes no sense.
You know, I don't know a lot about energy, but one thing that kind of astounded me early on when I returned home in some of the discussions regarding energy, oil dependency, I was informed that a huge amount of energy, electrical power, here in Hawaii prior to statehood was actually generated by the plantation mills, the sugar mills and so forth, the burning of bagasse, creation of electricity, the excess of which was beyond the needs of the plantation, was sent out to the community. And my understanding was once statehood came into action, the governing bureaucracy told the plantations that you can be agricultural or you can be public utilities, but you can't be both. So make your choice. So of course their whole reason for being at that time, prior to residential development, was agriculture.
Yes.
So what happened? All right, so we need another source of electricity. That's when the oil-fired generation facilities all of a sudden started sprouting up and taking over what previously was done with renewable, sustainable, burning bagasse or whatever else.
Yeah, we actually had a brief period with hydroelectric first.
A little bit of
Under the Queen, the palace was powered by hydroelectric power.
Well, that's interesting.
And then we converted to biomass, and the electric companies were paying the sugar mills far lower costs than what it would cost to use oil and other stuff.
I see.
So not only were they discouraged statewide,
right,
but in terms of what price they were making for it, it was ridiculously low.
So here we are, we're on the palace grounds. This palace at the time it was built was about as high-tech as anything in the world. And the electricity was generated by hydro. And where was that done? Do you know?
It was the Nu'uanu Stream,
right?
And the power station, I believe, was in the corner of Iolani Palace that way.
Well, that's interesting because I hadn't given it any thought. You know, I knew that we had telephones before anybody else there, that there was electrical power, and I never even gave it any thought as to where that power came from.
Well, King Kalakaua met with Edison and talked about the technology.
No kidding. Kalakaua.
And of course, Edison, even though we don't think of him as this way, Edison was the one who said, we need a lot of little generators around the place. We do not want these central power plants with massive transmission lines.
Right.
And then you have utilities saying we're Edison Electric with centralized power and massive transmission lines.
We'll have one for North America.
Yes.
Yeah. That's interesting. I didn't know about that. You know, my mother worked in this palace in the territorial days. My grandfather was in her father was in the legislature. I'm going to ask her if she knows how this was powered early on. So early, the very first was hydro.
And then we went to biomass, and we had a lot of biomass.
Right.
And it wasn't until really after statehood that we began bringing in this oil fired.
Right. Yeah.
And then in the 1990s, the state said, you know, we're concentrating too much in oil, and we need to diversify. So we're going to import coal.
Oh, great. It's not. We don't grow too much of that here, do we?
No, no.
So
it's
that's
still,
another product, another fuel that's got to come from elsewhere.
Right. And now the big craze is we got to go with biofuels, and of course Imperium, which just put out an initial public offering with the Securities and Exchange Commission, and then pulled it back to say we don't want the public to know what our books are really like.
Yeah.
They want to build a plant in Campbell Industrial Park area, and they told the land board, we want a 35-year contract for the land, and we will attempt to try to have 10% local crop starting in 10 years and going all the way out to 35 years. But we don't want you to mandate it to us because that means we might not be able to raise funds. So we're only committing to 0% in 35 years, but we're going to attempt to be 10% local. So if we're switching from oil and coal to imported vegetable oil,
or palm oil.
Palm oil, ethanol from Brazil, it's still an import.
Yeah. Still dependent on the ships to bring them here to us.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you what, I think anybody in their right mind has got to recognize that if we can meet our needs here, let's do that. Let's get off that grid, you know.
And that raises a very important topic. In 1978, when we passed constitutional amendments for agricultural self-sufficiency and energy self-sufficiency, and now there's talk about gutting that and putting in the 2050 plan.
2050.
Senator Kokobun's plan to overhaul the state plans and to bring in a whole new plan. It better at least have the safeguards in that the 78 plan had.
Well, is this an opportunity to improve, or?
Well, without enforcement and without implementation, if you just want to talk about it, I wouldn't say that's an improvement. We have to see the concrete plan saying, this is what we shall do, and this is who will pay at this year if it's not done.
You mentioned global warming, and a couple of things come to mind. One is the film, the documentary that Al Gore did.
Right.
Interested in what you think about that. And then the other thing is that there must be some people taking it pretty seriously, because here this week in Hawaii there was a gathering of people from around the world who are, I hope, concerned with these same issues. Why don't you tell me what you think about Al Gore's documentary for one thing, and then kind of lead into what transpired here in Hawaii.
Although it wasn't as popular, I like to bookmark it as two separate films. There was Al Gore's film, and then there was The Great Warming, which came out of Canada, aimed at the evangelical crowd. So you had one aimed at sort of the lefties and one aimed at the churchies, and together they both raised an alarm about what's coming. And the UN has been saying that we have only a few years to get this right, the United Nations. President Bush has never really wanted to sign on to these international agreements. Therefore,
well, the Kyoto Protocol, the U.S. has never signed on to.
So he decided in Washington, D.C. to get together the worst polluters and to say, let's do a voluntary, no commitment, nothing, and just sign an agreement ahead of Bali, ahead of the UN talks. So they met in Washington, and not only didn't they talk about anything, but they didn't pass any kind of agreement. So then Bush wanted to say, let's come to Hawaii and preempt the UN again and get an agreement here. And nations showed up, but they were like, come on, US, do something. And so nothing came out of this. And now President Bush is going to go to the G8 summit this summer, and say, let's at least have an agreement there so that we can get ahead of the UN. But people around the world are looking at the presidential election and saying the 3 or 4 leading candidates are all saying we got to address global warming, and therefore the Europeans and others aren't going to sign on to some weak Bush initiative, knowing that the U.S. policy is about to change.
Well, I think you were probably up there all the time this stuff was going on up in East-West Center, huh? Is that where they got together? And I'm wondering if there was any good at all that came out of the gathering there. I mean, I mean, I travel around to a lot of meetings around the world myself, and sometimes things happen that are beneficial, even if the major thing isn't accomplished. So sometimes there are alliances that start to build, and some good things that start to happen. And I'm hoping that something good happened here in Hawaii. Wouldn't it be great if, you know, I think a lot of us see Hawaii as kind of the model for what can happen in a world in almost every respect, you know, civil, social, environmental. And wouldn't it be neat if we actually could accomplish some really good things here that originate in Hawaii?
I think we did, although I don't think it's what everybody expected. It's what we had hoped for, is that the international media came to see what was going on. And they saw our protests and they covered us across the world. And therefore we brought a lot of international spotlights into what's happening in Hawaii and built alliances with people beyond. And that's what's going to take to really highlight what's going on here, so the issues from energy, Hawaiian issues, cultural, all of it can get the spotlight of the international attention, and that makes it harder to cover it up by the government here.
Yeah, wouldn't that be interesting if the demonstration is what really got out a message, even if nothing else came out of the formal gathering. Well, you know, I was in Geneva just a couple of months ago. I go quite frequently. And when you see the different delegates from the different states around the world, to me, there are some positive things going on. Even if it's just a little shift in attitude, there's some good things going on. And I'm hoping that we can see some of that, and that it can get out there, because people need to. I think people need some reassurance that there's some progress being made. Otherwise, it's totally you know, it's just total frustration. You know, if there are no good things happening, and that's why we're looking for some evidence of positivity. You know, some evidence of some good things happening. And so, if it happens to be that the best thing that came out of this gathering was the fact that through your demonstration, the public, international public, has a better feel, then that's an accomplishment in itself. So how are you continuing now? This was probably like a milestone. I mean, a lot of these events like this, they just suck us in and they take all of our energy and all of our time, and we're just totally wrapped up in them, and then they're over, and then we do what?
Well, we're entering a really exciting phase because the utility has just decided to really go ahead with palm oil in its power plant. And they went before the Public Utilities Commission and said, please approve our contract, but don't permit Life of the Land to be in this regulatory proceeding. And the PUC said, no, Life of the Land can come into it, that's no problem. Then Hawaiian Electric turned around and said, well, now that they're in, we don't want them to see any of our sensitive information, even though that's what we're going to be discussing in this docket. And 2, we don't want to have any witnesses. We want to have our lawyer get up there and just spout something, but with no witnesses and nothing you can actually say, he said that, he didn't say that. And so now the Public Utilities Commission has to look at their proposal and our proposal. And what scares the utility, I think, is we bring in a dozen expert witnesses. We bring in lawyers, we bring in PhDs, we bring in Hawaiians, and we seek to really talk about the different issues that need to be understood before you jump into a new fuel. And we're going to also discuss local crops, what crops would grow here, because if you are going to use biofuels, it makes more sense to have them local and sustainable than imported and climate causing.
You know, what about, just a real quick question, because we're kind of winding things up, but what about these fuel cells that were discussed here as being a solution for some of the issues?
fuel cells are really batteries because you need to take the hydrogen and break it apart and then use it. And the process uses more energy than if you just used it in the first place. So batteries, or pumping water uphill and letting it drop, or pumping air into a balloon and letting it out, all of those are batteries, and they can be useful as batteries, but shouldn't be confused with the energy source themselves.
Well, you just confirmed what an old engineer on Kauai mentioned, and that's exactly what he said. Stop putting all your eggs in that basket. It costs more to do it that way than what we're already doing, so you don't want to go that way. But somehow those messages don't get out. You know, it's just like we have to overcome the propaganda.
Yes.
But if we can keep repeating those things, people need to be able to know, well, what can we do? You know, things are confusing. So I think it's up to us to keep it as simple as possible, but get the word out.
Yes.
Get the word out. So we're very happy to have you here today and here always, but especially today on Voices of Truth. Henry, keep up the great work. We need to have these things communicated, and so that's the purpose of, that's why all this Olelo work is going on. That's why we do what we do and why you continue to do what you do. Great thing is we have the technology and the communication today that can really inform people. We want to thank you all for watching. Very pleased to have Henry Curtis with us here today. I'm Kaiopua Fife with the Kiwane Foundation, Voices of Truth, one-on-one with Hawaii's Future. Mahalo and a hui hou.